Hello, hello! Once upon a time, I made a Dead by Daylight video that was like an hour long, and it somehow killed my editor, so it never released. Whoops. I'll be a little bit more focused this time. I also made a Dead by Daylight animation that killed my desire to ever animate again, because no one watched it, despite it being the best thing I ever animated. Whoops. Okay, focus. I also have about 1,800 hours in the game. Am I good at it? Nah. And almost all those hours are on Survivor as well, so you're not going to see any riveting killer gameplay in this video. But I find Dead by Daylight's general design history interesting, and I will be referring to Dead by Daylight as DBD a lot to save brain space. It started as a messy party game, where you could do things like bring 4 brand new parts in your group and almost instantly win a match. The game also used to be a stealth hide-and-seek game that was so dark that you could literally hide by just standing completely still next to a corner. And now, the game is a sweaty, competitive experience that's about time optimization, not so much partying. Oh, I could talk about a lot. DBD is a mess of a game, which makes it really interesting. But specifically today, I wanted to talk about the hooks. To very thinly explain the gameplay with zero nuance, there are 4 survivors who sort of win if an individual can escape through one of the map gates, which require you to repair 5 generators to open. The killer always knows where the generators are, so he can patrol the map looking for scratch marks left by running and listening for the clap of your booty cheeks, etc. and so forth. The killer's goal is your murder. He can knock you down and bleed you out, which takes a long time. Putting you on a hook accelerates this a lot, and you get 3 stages of hook progress. One of just hanging there, one resisting being killed by the entity you're being sacrificed to, and then an immediate death. So you can be rescued from a hook twice. In theory, anyways. And yeah, there's hatches and exposed statuses and infected states and sabotaging and so on. Doesn't matter. Focus. Now, this system obviously was born out of the idea that hooking people would look really cool. It's on the posters, it's the defining feature of the genre it accidentally created, and other games also, in error, keep replicating the problems that it ends up creating. Most of the game's problems stem from its conception as a weird party game that they thought would probably peter out and die after a couple of years. The tone and direction of its design has radically changed, but its fundamental concepts haven't. And this is what is interesting to me, because I love fundamental design issues. You can't change them, you can only work around them. When the game came out, the developers obviously conceived it as being this stealth and hide-and-seek sort of game, first and foremost. The generators are a way of making the survivors gather in spots where they can reliably, maybe, be found. I could get into the weeds with tear radius and scratch marks and whatnot, but point being, the hooks at the time were not a big deal. The devs seemed to just think that if you were discovered and knocked down, you failed because the game is about stealth. The hook system was just one way of navigating the killer back to potential targets. And again, most importantly, it didn't get enough time in the oven as an idea. Now that's not fact, that's just one way of looking at things, but, as with any competitive stealth game, people quickly optimized all fun and suspense out of the experience. It was no longer about giggling in a bush as the killer passes by, it was about time optimization. The devs encouraged this and kept making perk and system changes to accelerate the shift. The lighting engine eventually changed and removed the by daylight part of the game, and now most maps just look like they're set around noon or so. The modern game is about survivors trying to commit to rushing generators while the killer tries to optimally down a new survivor seconds after hooking the prior one while regressing generator progress at the same time. It is very stressful for both sides. Survivors in a bad match have no chance to play and no agency. Killers in a bad match have lots of agency, but are on a severe time limit that spotlights every failure they make as being the end of the world. These days, the avoidance part of the game is almost non-existent, and it's more about looping the killer around objects and pallets once they do show up to attack you. And they absolutely will, because the game hand-feeds them tons of information on where you probably are in various ways. Now, what exactly is the core problem with hooks with all that in mind? The core problem with hooks is that the hook system is replacing a respawn system. If you're playing, say, a first-person shooter when you die, where do you go? Typically, you go to the opposite side of the map of wherever most enemies are. In older first-person shooters, they didn't do that. Each team had a side, and you respawned in your base. And if one side was overwhelming the other, they could routinely trap you where you revived. You'd spawn and immediately get shot by like 5 other guys. Spawn camping. Now in DBD, what happens when you get downed? Do you respawn on the opposite side of the map? No. The killer is allowed to take you wherever he wants. And after he places you on the hook, he doesn't even necessarily need to leave. He can just wait there for you to either die, or for someone to show up to help you. This results in him having 2 targets instead of 1, maybe even 3 or 4, assuming the teammates aren't on Discord or are strangers or something. And what happens when you are rescued? Do you get revived to full health and reappear again in another part of the map? No, you are placed directly below the hook at half health and can immediately be killed once again. This is how the game used to behave. There have been many additions to the system over the years. Baked-in haste and endurance to let you take a hit and escape the area faster, a new meter that builds to 100% if the killer refuses to leave the area that allows you to unhook yourself, although it doesn't really work that well, and lots of perks they tried to use to band-aid the system over the years, like borrowed time, camaraderie, reassurance, and so on. There is so much to talk about here, and I'll discuss none of it, because I am a man, and I can control my urges.
Gotcha.
Nah.
Bring that boy back here. Oh, I'm sorry, old man. I had to do this to you.
Because point being, the hooks remain. There is absolutely nothing you can do to the system to fix its core issue, that the killer has total access to the core respawn mechanic. It all went wrong from the very beginning. If you're a survivor, if you're hanging from a hook, you aren't playing. It's equivalent to a respawn timer. Each stage is currently 70 seconds long because it takes such a long time for the killer to leave, to avoid them, approach the hook from potentially across the map, and so on. So it's completely possible to have a situation like, say, the killer has Lethal Pursuer, which tells the killer your exact location immediately. Elsewhere, another survivor immediately sees Hex Haunted Ground, but isn't able to know what it is. They spend the 14 seconds required to cleanse it, causing all of you to become exposed, which makes you a one-hit kill. The killer is a blight or a nurse, because of course they are, and they warp on top of you at the speed of light and down you within about 20 seconds of the match actually starting. Or maybe it was just a modern hillbilly and you heard his terror radius 1 second before he hit you with a chainsaw. Fun stuff. Anyway, the killer leaves you bleeding out on the ground to chase someone else, but no one ever comes to get you, because it's solo queue, and there are no design guarantees. You crawl around on the ground in the dying state, unable to do anything at all. The killer returns eventually, after 239 seconds, 1 second before you die, and then they hook you. And because, again, it's solo queue, and this is a worst case scenario, no one ever bothers to come get you once you're hooked either. You spend 70 seconds on stage 1, 70 seconds on stage 2, and then you die. You're technically in a video game, but you spent literally 6.5 minutes not being allowed to play it in any fashion whatsoever. Total waste of time, all thanks to there not being an actual respawn system. That's the general issue with DBD's most basic design issues. It is a game that is preoccupied with the spectacle of what the killer is doing specifically. It doesn't care if you're enjoying yourself, only whether the game lasts long enough for the killer to put on a show. Even the lore of the setting is that the entity is making the survivors and killers fight one another so that it can harvest these slasher film-esque moments as nourishment. As the game has gotten faster and faster and more serious, it also needs tighter and tighter controllable windows of time. The time it takes for survivors to finish a generator got longer, the killer's ability to regress a generator got more difficult, also the killer's ability to ignore basic mechanics like terror radius, survivor location, and health states skyrocketed, and systems like the survivor's wiggle mechanic and sabotaging were all but eradicated in the name of match security. If someone knew a spot on the map and the killer couldn't carry them away from it without them escaping, it ruined the game. If entire teams set out to permanently destroy all the hooks on one side of the map, it ruined the game. Even something like Dead Hard, which was an on-command invincibility that lasts about a second or so, could ruin the game, since it effectively added a third health state during chases, making them last even longer. Lots and lots of problems. This all comes down to there not being designed time gating that ensures matches have minimum lengths in addition to maximum lengths. The game has no way to ensure competitive timed balance in a system about action efficiency, so it relies instead on simply pressuring the hell out of players to do things as fast as they possibly can. You don't have time to enjoy your actions in this sort of system, because there's no buffering. Once all 5 gens pop, that's it. If you're hiding from the killer, you're wasting time. If you don't rocket to the next survivor the second you hook the previous one, you're wasting time. Even if, say, the gates always opened after 30 minutes, and generators only reduced the time down to 15, you'd still have all sorts of other issues still relating to how players reset after their designed fail states, in addition to concerns about stealth and so on. Dead by Daylight is a game of 1,000 systems that are barely cooperating with one another, but it still mostly works. If you change one thing, you have to change another. It's sort of a house of cards. If you alter a system as close to the design base as the hook system is, it can make the whole thing fall apart. In my old video, I had a whole section about redesigning the systems to create these sorts of things. But the gist of it is that the core experience isn't repairing or dangling from hooks. It's the killer replicating a slasher film, which the game struggles to do sometimes because it's evolved into something else. Especially now that stealth is a no-no word. And that's really interesting to have watched happen over the years. It's why you see players yelling at one another for doing things like hiding, opening chests, or breaking totems that aren't hexed or whatever. And why you also see killers freeze in place and disconnect if they don't get a single down within 1 minute. They are stressed out and panicking because the game sometimes feels like working on a factory line. And the hooks are the culprit for many of those issues only because it is the foundation for all other mechanics since it controls player resets. Now, I'm going to give you a great example. In more recent times, Pyramid Head was added to the game. Yeah, Pyramid Head from the Devil May Cry series, who has the ability to instead send survivors to a cage that immediately spawns on the furthest opposing side of the map from where the killer is. And yeah, I know he's from Resident Evil, it's a joke. But in other words, this is a more reasonable respawn mechanic. In the even more recent 2v8 mode, they realize this hook mechanic has gotta go. So in that mode, every killer instead uses this Silent Hill-esque cage mechanic, which tells me that internally, Behavior understands what a terrible idea it was to base the entire identity of the game around meat hooks. Side tangent here, people do love the 2v8 mode, and they love it because it does get rid of the hooks and a lot of their baggage. Also, since there's so many people, there's not as much pressure on one individual person to carry the rhythm of the whole match. Unfortunately, 2v8 has a problem with killer queue times, and I think that's because the pool of players wanting to play Survivor isn't that big, and it gets reduced by 8 each time there's a match, so there's a lot of competition for targets. And regardless of Survivor performance, the mode is still absolutely about action efficiency, the same as the normal mode. I think the reasons for not using hooks in 2v8 are actually way more vast than a simple, we have a chance to fix an issue. All the problems associated with hooks would be doubled with 2 killers. Plus, with swarms of survivors, killers intentionally hooking them where they would want would result in gigantic piles of dying bodies being perpetually rescued by one another in a whirlpool of chaos, and you get the idea. But also, killers would simply not have the time otherwise to kill everyone that quickly if they also had to go find a hook. You could populate the maps with even more hooks, but modern DBD maps are already absurdly packed with hooks to ensure killer security in the modern form of the game. To the point here, as killer, you're still racing against the clock in all sorts of ways, yes, but the issue with queue times I think stems from the Survivor gameplay being a bit boring, so people are not really that compelled to do it. As Survivor, you're really not allowed to loop the killer for very long in 2v8 because of the time constraints, so you're really not doing much of anything. That's probably the second major issue with the game, maybe I'll make a video about that. Survivor gameplay is boring if you aren't good at looping, because there's no stealth anymore in a game about action efficiency. And no, that's not a "I'm bad at the game, give me free stuff" argument, Mr. Reddit. I'm saying the totality of behaviors and the design of your systems doesn't correlate to how fulfilled the player is, based on their perceived agency, what should be a notable dynamic experience. What are you doing in a match? Sitting in front of a generator and sometimes you heal someone. Not too much. All the design focuses on the killers, when the majority of the players in any match are survivors. Old problem, new video? Who knows.
Got her. Hit her! Come on, just break it out! Good shit. It is so disgusting.
Yeah, it's
Anyway,
repulsive.
this video was originally going to be about the concept of controlling space in the game. but I kept coming back to the hook problem because I've always considered that to be the poster child issue to the game's design. Plus, most issues with controlling area come down the hooks anyways. Trappers still to this day are encouraged to camp basement hooks in their shack due to area control. Skull Merchant, a really interesting example, was effectively a totally failed killer that they've nerfed into a do not use state. And that's because they made the same mistake with her that they did with the hooks. They made an area control power her central design tenet. And because all of the game is about controlling area, hooks, generators, and so on, they cannot fix it without totally altering her in a fundamental way. It's the same sort of House of Cards issue. However, DBD is still a fun game. Sometimes it's miserable, yes, but I have a lot of hours in it and I'll keep playing it. But this is probably its biggest design failing, and it's interesting how they've had to work around it for so many years. For some people, they'll never have even noticed and won't consider this a problem at all. And I think that's a testament to how much work has gone into trying to alleviate these problems, especially in a game with about 30 different status or state effects, almost 40 killers, and almost 300 perks to worry about. The fact that it works at all is astonishing, especially when you consider what a simple game it was in 2016. I'll give you guff behavior, but fine work. You're not perfect, but you're doing a great job. I appreciate you guys. Just like I appreciate my patrons and all you guys watching my videos. I hope you're enjoying this format. It's tough for me to write because I want to talk about everything. But I'll see you next time.